we're going to have a discussion about Oedipus the King by Sophocles. So Dr. Myers is going to open this with some remarks, I guess, about the play and about what we're doing here in reading this, and then we're going to get into a discussion.
I feel it's a grimly timely play. It's timely in a grim way because it opens with a health epidemic. The city of Thebes has been overrun by plague. Many people are dying. They are dying in the streets. The animals are sick as well. And the scale of this epidemic has escalated to such a point that the people think this must be some kind of divine retribution. This has gone beyond a merely natural level of misfortune. Of course, people's fortunes go up and down, but the scale of this misfortune has become so huge that the future life of the city itself is threatened. Whether the city will continue to exist at all is now uncertain. And the horror of that thought for the ancient Greeks is extreme. You have to remember something that came up in the discussion of the shields, for example, when we did Homer and Virgil, that for the ancient Greeks, the fundamental expression, the fundamental manifestation of cosmic order is the city, the ordered life of people living sociably together under a single social and political system. That is civilization. That's what protects us. That's what raises us above the beast. That's how human rationality and sociability are expressed, is through life in the city. And they cry out. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm going to be reading sometimes from a different translation, but you can find this within the first couple of pages. The line numbers won't be a perfect match, but around about line 55, the priest speaks of the plight of this city for what right before Oedipus makes his first speech. For what are city walls or ships without men alive in them? Nothing, nothing at all. They have the external infrastructure of the city. They have streets and towers and buildings, but the people are dying, and it looks as if they will be left with a shell of their civilization, not a real social order. This is all because of this this plague, this epidemic, which is described in the priest's opening words around about line 20. For the city, as you see yourself, is pitched and tossed beyond endurance. It can no longer lift its head from the depths, the surge of blood. There's death in the fruit enfolding buds of earth, death among the pasturing flocks, death in the barren pangs of our women. A fiery god swoops down and drives the city headlong, the hateful plague by which the house of Cadmus is emptied, and black Hades made rich with cries and groans. It's really important to see how the play begins not just with a health problem, right? But with a threat to the total dissolution and collapse of cosmic order, as it's expressed in the life of the city of Thebes. That's why it's assumed to be a theological or metaphysical problem. That's why they end up consulting a prophet, because we need, clearly the gods are against us. We don't know why. What have we done wrong? We need divine assistance. We need some kind of divine intervention. We need, and this will bring us to the central problem of the play, we need one thing most of all, knowledge. It's a play about knowledge.
Yeah, it's also. I'm just going to read the version that we have in the reader here. The last bit that you read there. A burning god rakes his fire through our town. He hates us with a fever. He empties the house of Cadmus, enriching black Hades with our groans and tears. I just thought that was a really rich rendering of those lines. Again, we don't want to dwell too much on the current circumstances, but it is an interesting contrast, isn't it, to our own culture, which doesn't actually no one's consulting Christian pastors about the existential crisis that we're having. Whereas the first people that are spoken to here are priests. You know, they're consulting the priest. How do we deal with this problem? What's going on? Why is this happening? And the priest is the one who's delivering almost information about why this is happening to some extent. So there is an interesting contrast between our culture and theirs, but that's not necessarily the focus today. You talked about this, or you mentioned this. This is almost a problem of knowledge. It becomes a problem of knowledge, but the thing that they're looking for is why. Well, the thing they want the answer to is why is this happening? Correct?
Yeah.
They want information. They want knowledge about this crisis that the city is having, because it's actually a civilizational crisis, which, as you said, is a metaphysical crisis as well.
Yeah. And the one person who needs the knowledge most is Oedipus, their king.
That's right.
He's depicted as a good ruler.
Yeah.
In Greek, and we might need to come back to this, in Greek the play is called Oedipus Tyrannos. The title for Oedipus in Greek is tyrant. That doesn't mean a bad ruler or a wicked, forceful ruler. It just means a ruler who has come to power through his own, let's say, his own skill.
Yeah.
And therefore, he hasn't come to power through the normal hereditary line. That's why he is a
tyrant.
Tyrannos. So he has come to power by unusual means, because there was no available hereditary ruler. And therefore, one of the problems for the tyrant is it's harder to hang on to power. If you simply inherit the throne, the only thing you've got to do to hang on to power is stay alive. But for the tyrant, it's a more tricky problem. And the play is partly about that. It's partly about the toll, you could say, the toll it takes on the human spirit to be a tyrant, to be not simply inheriting the throne, but having to secure it, to maintain it. Much more like pretty much all modern political rulers are tyrants by this.
That's right.
So Oedipus has unusual pressures on him, as well as just the fact that he's a good ruler. He loves the city of Thebes. He loves ordered, civilized life.
And there's no hostility. You'll note, it's interesting. There's no hostility from any of the other characters toward him at any point. And so he's good, not in the sense, not even just that he's actually good at his job, but people love him as well.
Yeah, even to the end, even when all the horrific things come out about Oedipus, no one's against him. No one thinks he's a bad man.
No.
This is important for our response to the play too, to keep in mind that he is not being portrayed as a bad or morally flawed character in any way. We can come back to that. But here's what Oedipus says in, do you want to read it from your translation?
Yeah.
The first speech he makes around line 50 when he responds to the priest, he has several lines about how the external condition of the city is kind of microcosmically reflected in his own soul. This shows what a good leader he is, and it shows why the problem of the city is a personal problem for him. So,
I'll read from the start of that speech. I do pity you, children. Don't think I'm unaware. I know what need brings you. I know what need brings you. This sickness ravages all of you. Yet sick as you are, not one of you suffers a sickness like mine. Yours is a private grief. You feel only what touches you, but my heart grieves for you, for myself, and for our city. You've come to wake me to all this.
Notice the irony as well. One of many, sometimes every line in this play is ironic, but when he says, I'm not unaware. But
he also says that yours is a private grief, but it actually becomes private for him eventually, doesn't it?
He has the most public grief of all and the most private grief of all. And the fact that he's a private person with a horrific domestic life that he doesn't yet know about, and a public person, Oedipus's story is tragic in more than one way, at more than one time, and grief kind of compounds grief, horror compounds horror. But that opening statement that what the citizens of Thebes feel is their own private sickness, their own fever, their own suffering, their own grief. What he feels is something public. He feels the plight of the city in his own heart. It is therefore morally imperative for Oedipus, more than anyone, to get to the bottom of this. If the gods are against us, if we're being judged, the only right thing for Oedipus to do is to ask this question, why? He has to know.
Yeah.
And this is what will set him on a path towards his own undoing.
We'll come back to this thought again, but I think it's worth pointing out at this point that as the audience of this play, and you have to imagine this as a play, everyone actually already knows what the full detail of the crisis is, correct? So people reading these first lines, I do pity you children, don't think I'm unaware, yours is a private grief, whereas my grief is for the city. Everyone who's watching this, and you as readers, or us as readers, we know, this is highly ironic, because we know what he's going to find out, right? So there's a knowledge that we have that he doesn't have in the play, correct?
Yeah, and that's basically the definition of irony, is when the audience or the reader knows something that the character doesn't know.
Yeah.
Next week, when we look at the Joseph story in the Bible, we'll see another. These are two of the most richly ironic texts in literary history: is Oedipus Tyrannos and the Joseph story in the book of Genesis, where there are so many things the characters don't know, and the reader is left to infer in Genesis about the way God is behind the scenes, providentially guiding events, even through the characters' bad actions, even through their bad decisions. In the case of Oedipus, because we know who he really is, that conditions everything conditions our response to the play. Aristotle, in his book called Poetics, where he defined the different literary genres, comedy and tragedy, he said that the basic nature of a tragedy is that there are other types of definitions, other aspects to his definition, but a tragedy is a story that evokes a sense of pity and fear. And the pity comes through the irony. There are so many things that we wish Oedipus didn't have to discover about himself. There's so much that we know about him that we wish we could protect him from. Right when he's on the brink of knowing everything, there's a moving passage where his wife/mother Jocasta says, "Stop asking. Don't ask anymore. You poor doomed man, just stop. Don't ask another question." That's how the audience feels too.
Yeah.
We are, if we could, we would rush out from our seat and save Oedipus. How would we save him exactly? What action? I guess this gets to the question of the performative nature of tragedy. It's not designed just as a story to be read. It's a public spectacle where people gather together to watch something unfolding in front of them. And if you think of a tragedy as that type of almost liturgical public event where the audience also plays a role, what is the role that we play? Fundamentally, if you don't mind me just commenting on this for a second, and then you can tell me what you think about it. Fundamentally, the experience of the audience in any theatre is one of kind of passive interest. We are aroused with pity. We know so much about Oedipus, and here he is walking around 3 meters in front of us, walking around trying to know, and if we could, we would save him from that. Our experience, though, of enforced passivity, we are interested in these events, we are moved by them, but we are unable to intervene. We are participants emotionally, but we're not able to act on the stage. We're not able to help. I think that is an important component in the overwhelming sense of fate and inevitability that just crashes over you when you read a play like this and other Greek tragedies. Things are unfolding and escalating in front of our eyes, and it feels almost as if we know enough that this shouldn't have to proceed, but we're powerless to act. You also have a chorus on stage in Greek tragedy, and you'll see the important role of the chorus in this play, but all Greek tragedies have the chorus. And this is almost like if you imagine a component of the audience
Yeah.
who are on stage,
Right.
and what do? They comment on what's happening, but they don't intervene. They are. So there's an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, of inevitability. And everyone else around, it gets to the point where Oedipus is the only ignorant person left, and everyone around him, even the shepherd and the messengers and his mother, everyone knows something he doesn't know. And we are forced, by the very genre of a play, by the way it's performed in front of us, we are forced to sit there silently watching while he finally reaches the culmination of this tragedy.
The tension, as you read it, even though you know what the outcome is, the tension still heightens. You can't help but feel more and more pity. You can't help but feel like more and more like you just want to go and tell him to just, like, I feel like I wanted him to just stop asking. I felt like the characters in the play, I felt like saying to him, just stop your search and don't worry about it. It's better for you not to know. But
do you think it would be better? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I was considering, is it better for him not to know or not? I mean, so the situation, of course, is that he is married to his mum, and he has all these children with his mother, and he killed his father. So the curse came true, but no one realised it until these moments. Is it better for him not to know? I mean, I guess you have on the one hand there is this plague playing out, which is occurring because of divine displeasure for someone's conduct. Is it better for him? It probably is better for Oedipus not to know personally, but as a public figure, he needs to find. Like, he's taking responsibility in his role as king to find out.
Yeah, because if he didn't know, presumably this plague is just going to keep going until there's no one left alive.
That's right.
And he will have completely failed in his vocation as a
that's true.
ruler.
Yeah.
Won't he be morally a worse man?
Yeah.
If he didn't know?
Yeah, I see. So his moral, I guess his moral standing is actually maintained by being given knowledge of his plight, right? Because he's actually innocent, and he's innocent.
Yeah, he's done nothing wrong.
He didn't know who Jocasta was.
Yeah.
He didn't know who. Is it Laos? Is it?
His father.
Yeah. Sorry, forgive my strange pronunciation.
I've actually forgotten his father's name as well.
Yeah. Anyway, my pronunciation could be totally wrong, but he didn't know who his father was either. So all of these.
Laius is the father.
Sorry,
Laius and Jocasta.
Yeah. He doesn't know who they were. He's completely innocent in terms of his motives for his actions, right? So, yeah, I mean, in one sense he maintains his moral integrity throughout the play.
And one reason I think it's important to one of the hard things about reading it, if I can put it this way, I think if you've grown up with the storytelling conventions of like Western Christian civilization, we are used to we take it for granted that characters have a high degree of agency, that they have choices available to them.
Yeah, so there's moral agency, which seems to be linked to their outcomes. Like the good choices will result in good outcomes.
Yeah. And in the case of Greek tragedy, it's important to realize the extent to which this is a person who has no alternatives open to him.
Yeah.
It's actually a misunderstanding of the play if we read it, and I think we instinctively read it this way, as people who've been imbibed on Christian storytelling conventions, the Western novel and so on.
Yeah.
We look for it for almost the clue. Where's the point where he made the bad decision?
Yeah.
How could things have turned out differently? To see it almost as a moral puzzle. What would have been what's the optimal alternative future for Oedipus? If he'd stopped here, if he hadn't killed the man at the crossroads, if he hadn't have solved the rinses.
Right.
But what the play is about is the absolutely intractable web in which human agency is ensnared. It's not It's not a play that's inviting us to think how could things have been different. It's about the opposite. Look at how even the freedom that humans exercise is all ensnared in these webs of destiny. And it's a play about fate. And fate is not the opposite of human freedom.
No.
It's the thing that's working itself out through every free choice that Oedipus makes. If he'd acted differently, we know things would end up the same.
Yes.
It's been prophesied. It's fated.
That's right. I'm looking at line 531. I don't have a reference for you, but there's a long speech by
Blind Tiresias, the prophet.
Yeah. Do you know? He says at the start of the speech. He says, "You may be king, but my right to answer makes me your equal." And he starts laying it out. Do you know your parents? You are the enemy. He says, "What your marriage means strikes home. No man will ever be ground into wretchedness as you will be." He starts to really lay out these issues, and then the interaction gets to this point. Oedipus says, "What parents? Hold on. Who was my father?" And Tiresias says, "Today you will be born into ruin." So it's like, but he's recalling his original birth and saying, well, for the audience at least, this is going, oh yeah, he was born into ruin. There was nothing. It's almost like there was nothing he could have done that would have avoided this situation.
Yeah, and famously, in Aristotle's account of tragedy, he talks about the way tragedy evokes this sense of pity and fear, right?
Yes.
And he says it's quite important that the central character in a tragedy is a good, relatable person.
Yes.
Not someone who was perfect or we couldn't relate to them and we wouldn't feel.
Because he has flaws, like he's got fury and anger. Like these are noted as flaws in the play. Like, why are you angry? What's and so that's a flaw, and it's a shortcoming, but it's not like it's fatal.
It's, according to Aristotle, it's actually an important one, simply for making us feel as if any of us could also. He can't be portrayed as a kind of godlike perfect character.
No, that's right.
If he's portrayed as a scoundrel, we won't pity him either, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we would to an extent. I think we still pity Macbeth, for example.
Yes.
But at any rate, Aristotle thinks in order to heighten that sense of pity, it has to be a good, relatable, a character who's good, but not perfect, who's got some flaw that makes them relatable.
Yeah.
And he speaks about what is often called a tragic flaw, some central mistake, let's say. Harmatia is the word Aristotle uses, which Christians translate sin.
It's sin, isn't it? Yeah.
But he doesn't mean
that.
A moral failing, just some error.
Missing the mark.
Some way in which he misses the mark, which proves to precipitate this reversal of fortune.
Yes.
What do you think is Oedipus's harmatia?
Or
what are some of the things that it's not first, if we start that way?
Yeah. Sure. I'm trying to think what it's not. I think I know what it is, but it's not. His anger is not his harmatia, is it? Because it doesn't actually drive him to any particular wrong conclusion necessarily, does it? If anything, it propels him. It propels him forward to what he wants to find. He responds angrily, has a temper. He lashes out at different points.
He strikes down the men at the place where three roads meet.
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't think that is portrayed as a crucial character.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Travel was dangerous in the ancient world. Yeah. People did die on the. You look at the portrayal of travel in the Bible too. You can get struck down. You can get robbed. You go armed, preferably with an armed guard if you have to travel.
Yeah. It's not that.
It's an overreaction, but it's not seen as a fatal character flaw.
Yes.
It's seen as something that could have happened to anyone in that circumstance.
Yeah.
The man who struck him, his father, struck him first, and he hit back. Make sure you're sitting at the same distance, because I just got too excited and spat. So if it's not the anger. Tell me what you think it is.
Well, I wonder if it's his relentless pursuit of knowledge. Is it the relentless pursuit of solving? He wants to solve this problem. He wants to act to find out who the cursed person is, right?
And if that's, I think that's right, the desire to know, that's his hamartia, that's his fatal flaw.
And we know that because it is actually the thing that results in the tragedy, correct? Or the results in the end of the tragedy.
If that's the case, it kind of raises this question: what is Oedipus's tragedy? If the desire to know, because I think this is right, without the desire to know, his story wouldn't have ended tragically. But you see how stuck Oedipus is in his fate.
Yeah.
Even if he hadn't known, even if he'd never been inquisitive.
Yeah.
Well, for a start, the city of Thebes would have been wiped out.
Yeah.
And he would have failed in his vocation as ruler.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that it is some kind of failing in your vocation as a human being if you don't want to know things? If you're just content with sheer ignorance, knowing that you could find out a crucial answer and you just go, no, I don't want to know. Isn't that another type of flaw?
Yeah, it's interesting that. Sorry to break in, but I just read the line where he said, "Hang on," who were my parents? That is such a relatable thing to say, because if I had just found out my parents were not my parents, if I'd found out I was adopted or whatever, I would be, and someone hinted that they knew, that's exactly the question you'd ask.
Yeah.
All of us would.
It's not a sin at all.
No.
It's an understandable weakness, let's say.
Yeah.
The human appetite for knowledge is a very relatable weakness.
That's right.
It's only a flaw in the sense that, I don't know, is it avoidable? Could you just choose to be someone who prefers ignorance over
even that is a moral failing, surely that's a moral failing.
Yeah.
So
and don't forget, this play is written in the same century that Plato and Socrates are walking around in Athens. The love of knowledge is a very human trait, but it's a very Greek characteristic in particular, and it's what's most noble and best about Greek culture. It's why they were able to have a well-ordered city. It's why they were able to develop rational laws. It's why they were a foundational thing about politics, because they were interested in finding out the truth about things. How does human nature function? How do we attain knowledge? How do we know what justice is going to be like, and so on? It's, in other words, if we recognize that his fatal flaw is the desire to know, we're not exactly scoring him
that's right.
an F morally.
No.
We're kind of shrugging our shoulders and saying, well, that does turn out to be his undoing.
Yeah.
But what's the alternative? How could it have been otherwise?
So this, just so I understand what you were saying about tragedy, this is a necessary part of tragedy, this hamartia, this fatal flaw?
According to Aristotle, now he doesn't call it I might read the relevant passage if I can see it here. He says, pity is occasioned by undeserved misfortune, and fear by that of one like ourselves. Blah, 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 blah. So he's basically said that the central character can't be all good and can't be all bad, or we won't have both pity and fear. There remains then the intermediate kind of person, a man not totally virtuous and just, whose misfortune, however, is brought upon him not by vice and depravity, but by some hamartia. You see the distinction, not by sin or a personal vice, but some fault, hamartia. For example, Oedipus and the men of note of similar families. The perfect plot, accordingly, must have a single, and not, as some tell us, a double issues, a change in the subject's fortunes. Oh no, sorry, he's going on there. So that is the passage where he talks about it. He doesn't actually use the term tragic flaw. He simply says, he's actually contrasting hamartia to what we would call sin, saying it can't be that his downfall is based on him being a bad man, or it wouldn't be a tragedy anymore. It wouldn't rouse pity in us, and it wouldn't rouse fear, because the fear comes from us looking at him and thinking, well, in that situation, I would have chosen the same. Here's the other thing I want to know about his desire to know. If he'd avoided that failing, if for some reason he'd been able to rest content with ignorance, would his life, objectively speaking, be any less tragic? Because he's already in a terrible life. He just doesn't know it. He has already fulfilled prophecy. When the action of the play starts, he is the murderer of his father.
Yes.
He is the incestuous husband of his mother. He has brought children into the world by his mother. If the best possible thing we could hope for him is that he wouldn't know all that, is that a benefit? Is it actually better to be living? And don't forget, there is like an objective moral order in Greek tragedy, because as a result of those things he's done, without his knowledge, without any bad intention, the whole city's being cursed. People are literally dying.
Yeah.
So if the alternative was for him to remain in ignorance, would that be better?
Yeah.
Or just bad in a different way? He is a fly in a web of fate. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, he is, and I feel like that's almost it's impossible to answer the question in one sense, because we don't know. It's difficult to imagine what would have happened if you hadn't known, right? Because there is a fatalistic drive behind all of this. It just propels itself toward the tragic conclusion of the play, where Jocasta's committed suicide and he gouges his eyes out. Or he scratches his eyes, whatever he's done.
He comes in, bursts into her room and finds where she's hung herself, and then takes the brooches that are in her clothing and stabs them into his eyes.
Yes.
I mean, we've all had days where we feel like this, but he actually carries it through.
It's a horrific end to a play. It's almost, but no, I think it wouldn't necessarily be better. In fact, I would have felt deeply disappointed in him if he had not pursued truth. There's something fundamental about that. There's something fundamentally good about the pursuit of truth, even if it is dangerous or damaging.
I agree.
I don't know what it is, but there would be something deeply wrong if he didn't.
Yeah, and this is where I feel that Greek tragedy is such a powerful instrument for exploring the human condition, right?
Right.
Because we read or ideally see this performed, and as we begin to wish that things could have turned out for Oedipus, what we discover is actually I can't truly wish that he never knew. I can't truly wish that he'd remained in ignorance. That wouldn't be a satisfactory outcome for a human being. Ignorance is not a good thing. Which means what we've been drawn into is a series of moral questions about what is this innate desire to know that is so deeply a part of the human condition that we would presumably rather to have knowledge and misery than to be happily ignorant. That's such a profound insight, I guess, into human experience, and there are very many experiences in life where knowledge is not something that helps you or makes you feel good, but something that brings you close to the end of your capacity to cope with life, and yet you still wouldn't have chosen ignorance.
Yes.
So the kind of paradox of the way he is paradoxically entrapped in his fate is linked to the paradoxical kind of, I don't know if paradoxical is the right word, the inevitability of wanting to know, even if we kind of wish we didn't have to want to.
Yes.
Why? Speaking of the blinding.
Yeah.
What do you think about his motives for blinding himself?
Well, there must be something quite symbolic about this, because he has just seen who he really is. and then he chooses to try and unsee it physically, but he can't, because just because you can't physically see doesn't mean you don't know it. I think that struck me as a symbolic attempt at regaining ignorance.
Yeah. All the way through the play, there's an interesting link between seeing and knowing. We've got blind Tiresias who reveals knowledge. We've got and ironically, Oedipus, when he doesn't like what Tiresias is saying, is, how would you know the truth? You're in the dark. You obviously can't see it.
Very ironic. Yeah.
But it's all back to front. But we've got this link between vision. I guess it's vision as the metaphor for knowing.
Yes.
Which has been, by the way, a very powerful epistemological metaphor right throughout Western history.
Yes.
Think of Plato's allegory of the cave.
Exactly.
Where the whole thing is
it's all about vision, what you can see.
Yeah, it's a kind of allegory of vision.
Just to remind the classists, when you ascend toward the sun and you can actually see the real. The forms, you can see the real world. Yeah.
And you get that movement back and forth between blind. You think you could see, but you were actually blind.
Yeah.
You go up, and when you fully know, it's a blinding experience.
Yeah,
you come
that's
back
right.
down. So the Greeks were interested in that analogy, that knowing is somehow like seeing. And it's very interesting how many of our assumptions about knowledge are actually based on that analogy.
Yes.
Anyway, he takes these brooches, tries to unsee what he's seen.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons, it's in a general way. He no longer can bear to look upon this world. Everything he's known has just knowledge is such an overwhelming catastrophe that if he could stick the pin all the way through to his brain, he would down into the part of your brain that houses memory. That's what he wants, is to forget. But the closest he can do is to pin out, to gouge out his eyes, or to stab out his eyes, I guess. He gives some other reasons too. He can't bear ever to see his children again. Do you think the sight of my children would be a joy to look at? Born as they were? No, never. Not to these eyes of mine. He renounces the sight of his, presumably, his much loved, dearly loved children, renounces the sight of them. He goes on, this is all around line 1370. Nor would the city, nor its towers and statues and temples be a joy to look at. I've deprived myself of these. So he never wants to see his children again.
Yes.
He never wants to see the city of Thebes again. And a third reason he gives, just before those two, is he refers to Hades. What do you make of that? And I find that the most interesting reason of all. The Greeks believed that you would take this body in some form or another. You would take this body with you down into Hades. So if you're blinded in this life, you will continue to wander blind in the life to come. Why is that important?
Is it to do with? So presumably he wants to. Presumably, in trying to blind himself, he's trying to blind. He's symbolically and physically trying to blind himself to who he is, to who his parents are, to his children, and so on. He doesn't want to see any of these things. But presumably, even in Hades, even if he is blind, it's not as though you then have no knowledge. Like, you don't lose all knowledge of your family and so on in Hades at all. That's not the depiction of Hades in Greek mythology, is it? It's actually still a conscious state. You're still interacting with people. So if he does meet his father, it's still his father. He just can't see him.
He just doesn't want to be able to see him.
He just doesn't want to be able to see him.
Same as his children in this life. They'll still be the children he loves.
Yeah.
He just renounces looking at them.
He does still love them because he embraces his daughters.
Yeah. How could he do otherwise?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's right.
One interesting thing about this, I think, so he stabs his eyes out to renounce seeing the things that have been important to him in this world, but in the next world, where his wife/mother has now gone, where the father that he has killed has now gone, in that next world,
yes,
I don't know what, even meeting his mother in the next life, who are you talking to now? Your mother or your wife?
Yeah.
How do you, that is such an unbearable prospect of meeting her again.
Yeah.
Again, given that the brooch can't reach all the way to his brain, given that he can't enter the next world without knowledge,
yes,
the nearest you can do is at least not have to look at it.
Yep.
At least enter blind. I find this important for the other question we asked. Would it have been better somehow if he hadn't known?
Yeah.
When Hades comes into it at the end, when we're reminded, and it's not just at the end, the play begins with cosmic order.
Yes.
Something is objectively wrong in the world, in the city of Thebes, and that is bringing these objective, real world consequences.
Yes.
The city is going to be left with no people in it.
Yes.
It is being, and they are described as going down to Hades. So there's this reference at the beginning to Hades, the world of the dead. And at the end, we're reminded, one day, inevitably, Oedipus will have to walk among the dead. Inevitably, if he got through this life happy, inevitably one day he will know everything.
He would still know. He can't avoid it, can he?
And that to me heightens the sense of the tragic inevitability of his situation.
He's fated to know.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah.
Let's talk about fate, because this is sort of one of the overarching themes. I'm going to just read out a couple of lines which hint at this. And so I'm looking particularly at, it's one of the big chorus stanzas around 13. It's my 1345. So if you go down from 1345 down to 1375, which I think we're about 10 out from each other.
Yeah, I see the one you mean.
Yeah. It mentions time. He says, time, who sees all, caught you living a life you never willed. Time damns this marriage that is no marriage, where the fathered children himself. So this is just one example. There are a number of times, but this is I think a really rich example where there is an external force, if you will, which has sort of bound Oedipus to go through this. He has no option. His choices won't make a difference at this point. As we've already said, even if he chose a different path in terms of knowledge, he would have eventually come around and found out in Hades. Time caught you living a life you never willed. Even his will, even though he has a will, it doesn't make a difference in this instance. What is this fate that Sophocles is sort of enunciating here? What is the ancient Greek image of cosmic order and fate?
It seems to be. Well, can I make one observation about it? Even if you don't believe in fate, I personally try not to believe in it.
Yes.
Occasionally things happen where you find yourself beginning to believe in it, and then you have to wean yourself off it by reading the Bible or Augustine or something. But even if you don't believe in it, there's something in it.
Well, there's a good reason why they believed in it. It's probably because it looks like it's true.
It has a certain amount of explanatory power. Yeah. And my view would be, okay, there may be better theories out there than fate, but you can't just take it away and say, well, everyone's just born with all this freedom and potential, and everyone can be whatever they want to be, without some vocabulary for talking about the limitations, the constraints that are placed around.
That's what this is, isn't it? Yeah, there is a limit to human agency.
A massive limit, a cosmic limit.
And this is how the Greeks limit that. In a big way, at least at a cosmic level.
It's not only a limit for the Greeks. Look at the way the very choices that he makes are the things that, with a kind of poetic elegance, when he decides to leave the city in order not to fulfill prophecy, that's the means
he
by
goes
which
and
you
fulfills
fulfill prophecy.
prophecy.
So it's not that your free will has a certain domain where you're free to regulate your own affairs and choose what you want,
Yeah, okay.
but ultimately things turn out. Even the things you want and desire are secret manifestations of fate. The Stoics had a different theory of this, where they basically said, so this is later than the ancient Athenians.
Yes.
The Stoics basically said, look, the whole universe is the whole system of everything is kind of fatalistically ordered, but you can still take responsibility for your own conduct. You're basically, they just carved out a very, very small zone, saying you still have authentic freedom. You can choose whether you're going to be resigned to the way things are, or whether you'll struggle against it, whether you'll live virtuously or viciously. They gave everyone this tiny oasis of genuine autonomy, autonomy that relates only to your own attitudes and conduct. So you've each got a tiny oasis of autonomy in a sea of fatalism. That's more or less the Stoics, but that's not the way Sophocles sees it here. There's no oasis of freedom.
No.
Your freedom is the tool that fate is using to trap you.
Yeah.
Every step you take it's as if you're, it's as if you're trying to get out of a spider web, but every step this is a stupid analogy, but I can't think of a better one. As you try and extract yourself, you don't realize that you yourself are spinning the web, and every move you make is trapping you even more.
The line that would sum it up is 1085. Jocasta says, the man Oedipus feared he would kill the man he ran from. That man's dead. Chance killed him, not Oedipus.
Yeah.
Right. It kind of sums up this sort of combination. He's actually trying to escape the web.
Yeah.
Well, he is. He tries to escape the web, but he can't.
Next week, I feel like this is I feel like there is so much authentic and profound knowledge about the human situation in this depiction of fate. My view is, unless you can find an even better account of the way human agency interacts with the things in our lives that we don't choose, it seems to me to be pure fantasy. Things in our lives are the products of our choice.
Oh yeah.
Just start with the language that your mother tongue, the culture into which you're born, the social norms, the family. I mean, most of the things that make us who we are things that we have absolutely no say about. Not one, like zero, no say. And yet, the experience of being human is, to a very great extent, the experience of having agency, freedom, of being able to choose things. So the Greeks had one way of making sense of that. Next week, we want to look at a very, very different account of the same kind of problem, that there are things that we don't choose, there are destinies that are appointed for us which are not the result of our choice, and yet we are moral agents who are able to choose. And so next week we want to look at a very, very different account, not of fate but of providence in the book of Genesis. But I feel like it's a wholesome task to spend at least a week contemplating what if the Greeks were right. It's not a terrible theory. It's a far better one than, let's say, a pure some kind of pure libertarian dream where everyone is just free all the time to do and be whatever they want. And to me, this is getting a bit more cultural criticism rather than literary criticism, but it seems to me that our culture is much more characterized by a kind of fantasy pretend, make-believe view of the world, where everything that happens is the product of what humans choose. And you only have to look at what's going on in the world to realize how fragile human agency actually is compared to cosmic type forces that are far beyond the power of anyone to anticipate or control. There's something in what the Greeks are doing. I think there's even more in what the author of Genesis was doing, but we'll get to that. You got any more thoughts on fate?
I mean, I think the contrast will be really helpful as we explore the Joseph story next week. And we're reading it in both the Bible and the Quran, aren't we? So it'll be interesting to also compare those two texts. But you're absolutely right. I think in your cultural critique, say at the end, I mean, we don't have to think very hard to think of an example of something which actually is most definitely out of human control. What's happening right now, it's actually engulfing our civilization. It's almost engulfing the whole world. In a sense, this play is written for today as much as it was for the ancient Greeks. It actually, if in reflecting on this question of human agency and fate, and whether humans actually are having libertarian freedom, whether they have control over their own lives, is an important question that I suspect more people will actually start asking at this time. And so it'll be interesting to see how culturally that plays out. But I think you're right that there's something to it. And I think the reason why the idea of fate, why the Christian West hasn't quite shaken that idea is because it's not entirely alien to our human experience. It's just there might be a better explanation. We'll see what we come up with next week. But why don't we leave it there? I think this has been a good discussion. We're looking forward to interacting with you online about this. We recognise it's a different interaction to what we would normally want and hope for, but we still think we can have a rich learning experience online in relative terms. So please throw out some comments about the reading or about this video. We'll be ready to interact with you when we can and interact with each other as well. Feel free to start other discussions too on Moodle if you want to open up a discussion in the week. I'm going to put a forum link in each week so you can sort of open up more text-based discussions more separately if you wish to do that. But yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you on Teams and on Moodle, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Ben.